So, I think we are ready to start. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. And ni hao to Zoom. And good afternoon to Keith Bennett in the UK. And assalamu alaikum to all the participants in Pakistan. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to be hosting this Friends of Silk Road initiative of the Pakistan-China Institute, which today coincides with a very historic event. As we are having this conference online, as we speak, His Excellency Wang Yi, the Foreign Minister of the People's Republic of China, is addressing the Islamic Foreign Ministers Conference in Islamabad, which is an historic first and which is an expression of the close camaraderie and the solidarity and support which China has always extended to Muslim countries and Muslim causes, be it Kashmir or Palestine. And the support has been political, moral, diplomatic, material, strategic. We see it also in the international fora. For us, whether it's FATF, whether it's the G20, whether it's the UN Security Council, whether it's the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And last week, we saw the induction of the Chinese fighter jets, JC-10 fighters, which you will see on display, inshallah, tomorrow at the Pakistan Day Parade also. So it's a very heartening development. And I also want to extend this opportunity that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have coordinated in the OIC for this initiative to bring China. At a time when China is under attack from vested interests in the West, it's being demonized. Its reputation is trying to be damaged, and they're also trying to destabilize China in the name of democracy and human rights. Just a few words about the geopolitical context. We are seeing a tremendous change in our region, which is part of the broader Muslim world. We have seen the retrenchment of American power in the post-9/11 era. And we are also seeing the rise, the peaceful rise of China, which is a source of strength for countries like Pakistan. And in this regard, we feel that this China's role in the region, the broader Muslim world, is going to be enhanced. China-Pakistan relations are strategic. And also, I think the emergence of China's relations with Saudi Arabia, coupled with the strategic shift in Saudi Arabia's domestic and foreign policies under the enlightened leadership of the Crown Prince, His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman, we have seen the liberalization of Saudi society, Saudi culture, Saudi economy, the promotion of women's rights, the curbing of religious extremism, and also improvement in Saudi Arabia's relations with Iran and Turkey. So a new order is developing in the broader Middle East region or the Muslim world. And I feel that Pakistan, China, and Saudi Arabia are going to be the strategic triangle in this emerging new world order in the Muslim world. Already there are talks between China and Saudi Arabia to have their oil trade in RMB, the Chinese currency, rather than the US dollar. And inshallah, in 2022, the summer of 2022, President Xi Jinping will pay a visit to Saudi Arabia. And Crown Prince MBS will visit Pakistan. So a new situation is developing. And it is in this context that the role of China is being brought into question by certain elements in the West. Questions that we reject because they are not legitimate. They are based on double standards when they talk of human rights, when they talk of democracy. I'll give you two findings of surveys done by the United States institutions. One was in July 2020, the Ash Center of Harvard University. They did a long-term survey from 2003 to 2016 of 32,000 different individuals in China. over a period of time. And they reached an interesting conclusion that they said that the Chinese government had never been so popular among the Chinese people as in the last 2 decades as it was till the end of the survey. And the level of satisfaction was over 90%, by the way. This is not any Chinese government survey. This is Ash Center, Harvard University, July 2020, and you can take it on the internet. Secondly, in January 2022, the US-based, it's Chicago-based actually, global PR consultancy, Edelman, EDELMAN, they have an annual trust barometer. How much trust do different sections of society have in their government? They refer to businesses, their leaders, opinion leaders, media, NGOs, people in government, civil society. And this came out in January 2022, this year. And they said in China, it's 83%. This is the survey from the United States of America. But the reason I'm citing it is also to state the facts. And also you will not find any mention of these surveys in the mainstream Western media, because they will always use other tactics to focus on China. So China has developed a system under the Communist Party's leadership, which is delivered on good governance, which is delivered on poverty alleviation, which is delivered on meritocracy, rising to the top, which is delivered on anti-corruption accountability also, and a democratic accountability also. And this year is going to be the 20th Party Congress of the Communist Party of China in the last quarter of 2022, which is going to be very important. So it is in that context we are having this development of the Friends of Silk Road in Islamabad, when the world is being transformed. And we also see an inexorable shift in the global balance of economic and political power away from the West to the East, where we rightly take pride in what is the emerging Asian century in the 21st century. So in this context, we reject any notion of a new Cold War. We reject any demonization of China, because that is based on geopolitics and ideological agenda. And we feel the way forward is connectivity and cooperation, more so in the times of the coronavirus pandemic, when the need of the hour is to close ranks against this common scourge to humanity, rather than conflict and confrontation. So Pakistan, of course, is playing its part in this role, and Pakistan-China strategic cooperation is, of course, very, very strong and very, very close. And I'm so happy that now it's enlarged to include, I would say, Saudi Arabia as well and other countries. So this strategic triangle, as I call it, Pakistan, China, Saudi Arabia, can underpin the emerging new order in the broader Middle East and the broader Muslim world after the exit of the United States military from Afghanistan, Iraq, and all these, the post 9/11 era has started. So it is in this context we are having this webinar. We have a very diverse and distinguished participation from Pakistan, from China, from the United Kingdom, and we'd like to hear all of you make short, sharp points, to the point. Please don't repeat what has been said. 8 minutes each, and we will be, I will be there to listen and learn from all of you. Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure and delight for me to welcome the first speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Masood Khalid, who is an Asianist in the Foreign Ministry of Pakistan, who has served as ambassador to China for 6 years, the longest serving Pakistan ambassador, I think, to China. He was there at the inception of CPAC, and he saw it through diligent hard work, through his commitment to Pakistan-China relations. And I think if any person in the Foreign Ministry of Pakistan knows China well, like the palm of their hand, I think it's Ambassador Masood Khalid. He's also served in Korea as ambassador, in Malaysia, and he knows the region inside out. So, sir, over to you, Excellency Ambassador Masood Khalid, sir, for your opening remarks. And I also want to welcome Raza Naeem Saab. I've seen you. He has just joined also. Thank you. He'll be speaking later in the day. Thank you so much. Ambassador Masood Khalid Saab.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. It's always a privilege to be in the company of Senator Mushahid Hussain, whose deep knowledge of China and intellect always, I find it a great value addition to any discourse. And he has prefaced his remarks, on this particular theme, which we are going to discuss today, by giving a very succinct, yet, a complete sort of picture of how the global situation is evolving and how the situation around China is evolving, and the new permutations and new partnerships which are evolving. Certainly, these are very important developments which we need to keep in mind. Now, coming to the topic which has been assigned, the whole process, people's democracy, understanding the Chinese system, I would like to share my thoughts a bit from history and then try to explain, according to my understanding, as to how Chinese system works. So I will start with New China in 1949, when the great Chinese leader Chairman Mao Zedong embarked on a journey of nation building and revival of the Chinese nation after a century of humiliation. In the course of implementing, that centralized system of economy based on Marxist and Leninist principles, the leadership of that time, Chairman Mao and others, they embarked on this mega initiatives of, Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, which had their ups and downs, highs and lows. But the downside was that after achieving, tangible results in the fields of education, defense industry, industrialization, the Chinese economy sort of reached a point of stagnation, and failing to meet the expectations of the Chinese people and their growing needs. So at that time, when the economic reform process started in 78, 79, China was a very poor country, the largest underdeveloped nation with a per capita income of barely $180, even less than Pakistan. So a turnaround was the leadership assumed by Deng Xiaoping in 78 or thereabout. And this reformist leadership took a historic course correction and embarked on the path of reforming the economy. So today, after 40 years of sustained reforms, China is no longer a poor country. It boasts a per capita income of over $10,000 and many more positive attributes to which Senator Mushahid Hussain has referred to. And these positive attributes are, in my view, unthinkable in several developed societies. So China is now the second largest economy of the world and expected to become the number one by the end of the decade. So China's spectacular rise and its economic model has been a source of curiosity as well as great discussion, particularly in Western capitals, especially as this model is at variance with the conventional Western model of free market economy or democracy. So I think there is a need to understand the mechanisms and the tools which China has so successfully employed to achieve its goals. First of all, it is important to bear in mind that being a great civilization, this is a very important factor, which has retained its continuity over millennia. Chinese rich history and its cultural impulse and its Confucian traditions, rooted in respect for hierarchy and the family as a social unit, are strong propellants of a dynamic society and the energy which we see in China today. Traditionally, if I'm not wrong, China has never been a democracy in the Western sense. On the other hand, it has been an entity of various social classes and races, which is unified around a great vision of China as a nation, or China being at the center of the world, the Middle Kingdom concepts. And in different periods of its history, strong Chinese emperors and Chinese leaders have tried to unify the state, unify this entity. So Chinese people have always looked towards a strong leader. So today, CPC provides that leadership by practicing what it calls democratic centralism. And China has evolved its own model of state governance, which offers an alternative vision to the Washington consensus. In the process of reforms, China has adopted the best practices of several developed economies, especially in East Asia. But China has indigenized them according to the local conditions. And we have the examples of special economic zones in Suzhou and Shenzhen and elsewhere, where China has adopted and learned from the best practices of Singapore and other East Asian countries. So China, under the leadership of CPC, follows both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach in national planning. Its two legislative organs, NPC and CPPCC, act as two wheels of a vehicle driven by CPC. These two organs remain fully engaged throughout the year, and it is important to understand, throughout the year, in a laborious nationwide exercise and an exhaustive consultative process, which is conducted in relevant specialized parliamentary committees to give policy inputs and recommendations to the government, which are then translated in legislation and policy making. This is a unique system, as CPPCC has their local chapters at the grassroots level, and their input to the central government is informed and is based on the pulse of the people. Elections of representatives at the local, county level and town level are also held, which allow, people's participation. So they are a stakeholder in the national affairs. And CPPCC represents a wide array of people from all walks of life. And a great emphasis is placed on meritocracy and on people-centric approach on the basis of consensus building. So the impression given by the Western media that the central government in Beijing dictates policies is factually incorrect. The central government gives policy framework and a strategic direction in accordance with national priorities and gives specific targets to local authorities with sufficient administrative and financial autonomy to achieve these targets. However, the central government, and this is a strong point of China, has a rigorous system of oversight, monitoring, and accountability, which is a key to the present success of China today. It is another argument that it's practically impossible for China to implement its policies, or for the central government to implement its policies in a big country like China, which has a huge population of 1.4 billion people, if there is no consensus. So there is no way that any central government could dictate its terms on the provinces to implement what it wants and its state rate. So I think this is quite fallacious and part of a propaganda. Now, since the reform process started, China has followed an economic model which aims at industrialization and modernization. So today, China is at the cusp of becoming an industrial giant, a technological giant. It has reformed traditional management systems, emphasized the law-based governance and democracy in the discharge of state responsibilities. China is not a gulag or a prison where Chinese people are, doing labor, forced labor. If that was so, 130 million Chinese tourists who were visiting abroad pre-COVID pandemic would not return to China. Obviously, they find their homeland, good enough to live by a happy and prosperous life. And more importantly, Chinese people take pride in their national achievements and contribute voluntarily and diligently to achieve national targets without coercion. It originates, from an inner sort of sentiment to contribute to China's development, to make it a great country. In the past 6 decades, China has achieved what the West took centuries to achieve. CPC has demonstrated that it has the will as well as the capacity to deliver. The Chinese government prioritizes human life and promotion of economic development as mutually reinforcing. The way Chinese government has handled COVID pandemic illustrates this point. And the fact that 2008 Olympics and the recently held Winter Olympics also show how Chinese nation participated in this national endeavor out of commitment and national pride. Democracy, in my view, entails prosperity and people's welfare and their participation as a stakeholder in national affairs. Chinese system fully ensures that through a system of meritocracy, through a system of consultative process, through a system of picking the best of the best to run the affairs of the state. The political and economic stability which China has achieved is the hallmark of the Chinese type of democracy, in my view. China has its own inherent strengths while avoiding the fractious kind of democracy practiced in Western countries. Chinese media also allows this debates and discussion on national issues in a balanced manner. China says that it does not want a Westminster type of democracy because it does not suit its conditions. It will practice its own model of democracy. And the level of satisfaction which the Chinese people have in their government and in the service delivery of the CPC is, was alluded to by Senator Moshayed Hussain. President Xi Jinping is very popular amongst the Chinese people, and these two surveys and the earlier survey of also, I think, Pew Research Center also testified that Chinese people are broadly, supportive of the government, and they are quite actually, because on a daily basis their life is improving. Chinese, if you go to a place after 6 months, you have not been able to visit a place in Beijing or even in some other cities, second and third tier cities, you'll find there is an improvement, a constant improvement is underway in the Chinese system so that people benefit. And course correction. Chinese are pragmatic. They understand that it's a big country and it obviously there'll be mistakes, there'll be some lapses. So course correction is a constant process which is undertaken in China. So despite, I will conclude here by saying that despite production, contributing nearly 30% to the global economic growth, and its economy is closely intertwined with the advanced economies of the world. China cannot simply be pushed out of global supply chains. That will be more damaging to the West than China. And the Western tirade against China on issues such as democracy, human rights, and a so-called rules-based order is also, I think, part of a self-serving agenda, in my view. The post-World War international financial and political architecture was created to serve certain interests. And Chinese, despite being the second largest economy and an emerging superpower, do not have that say and that status in this global architecture. So China is basically asking for its legitimate, say in the global affairs. But on the other hand, its rise is being challenged through kinetic and economic means. This policy, in my view, is not going to succeed, is bound to fail. China has the resilience and determination to not only address, but to overcome these challenges. And the success of BRI also, manifests this point very clearly. So I will conclude by saying and agreeing with Senator Mushahed that the world wants cooperation and connectivity, not conflict and cooperation. And it is very important for the two major powers, United States and China, to cooperate with each other, to coexist with each other, so that we sort of take forward the process of global prosperity and common prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Masood Khalid, and for your insights starting from the liberation of China in 1949. I'd just like to mention the reform started in 78 after the death of Chairman Mao. But you can see the first 15-20 years of China after liberation in 1949. Within 15 years, China had eliminated famine, feudalism, given what we call here roti, kapda, or makan. That was so Chairman Mao and the Communist Party of China, his colleagues from the revolution, whether Premier Zhou Enlai or Marshal Zhu and others, they provided the enabling environment. And by the mid-60s, by the way, China was a donor. They were giving assistance to African countries, to Pakistan. They were building the KKH in Pakistan. They were building the Tanzam railway in Africa, Tanzania-Zambia railway. And they were supporting liberation movements. In 65, when the Palestinians announced that they will start armed struggle, the first country to support them, China. African liberation movements. So China, and by 64, 15 years after liberation, under the leadership of the Communist Party, China had become a nuclear power on its own. So you can see it's amazing that the first phase, yes, poor, yes. When I went to China and Chairman Mao was there and Premier Zhou Enlai was there, and I was a teenager studying in FC College in Lahore as head of the Pakistan Youth Friendship Group. China was a very poor country. And I said, oh, I'm from Pakistan. We are so developed. But they were poor, but they were very proud of their heritage and of their independence. And then they were building that up. So that you can see that the groundwork was laid in that period and how China has transformed. So, and I think your one statistic is very clear about the 150 million Chinese tourists who go out, and all of them come back and they spend. And if you go to Europe now, you will find signs in, I was in Italy, in Chinese language. You can see how China is in that. So thank you, sir. Now our next speaker is Mr. Keith Bennett. Keith, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay, and Keith Bennett is an old friend, old progressive, an old revolutionary based in London. Currently is in Edinburgh for a small vacation. He's the co-editor of the Friends of Socialist China, which is a very popular online platform from England, and I occasionally contribute to it. They are very clearly supporting the People's Republic of China, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And it's over to you, Keith, for your insights in the matter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, my very dear friend, Senator Mushahed Hussain Saeed, and greetings from the Scottish capital of Edinburgh. It's a great privilege to be on this webinar here in the UK this morning, and of course in the afternoon in Asia. Our topic, as you all know, is Xi Jinping's concept of whole process people's democracy. Now, this is a theoretical innovation of Xi Jinping, but inevitably it has its deep roots in the history of the Chinese Revolution and in China's ancient society and culture. As we all know, and as we've just heard, the People's Republic of China, founded in 1949, is nearly 73 years old. But even before that, the Communist Party of China had been administering liberated areas for nearly 20 years, at least from the time of the Changxi Soviet Republic of 1931 to 34. And in those days, of course, the Communist Party was functioning in the most difficult conditions imaginable, the conditions of encirclement and suppression by Chiang Kai-shek, fighting Japanese invasion, and so on. So their only choice for the Communist Party at that time and for the Red Army was to rely on the people, and therefore to develop innovative concepts of popular democracy. And this brought us what in China is called the mass line, relying on the broad masses of the people, and what Chairman Mao called from the masses to the masses, namely taking the scattered and unsystematic ideas of the people, synthesizing them, putting them on a scientific basis, and taking them back to the people to be adopted and implemented as their own. And I think we can see the roots of President Xi's practice in this period. So, starting, if we say, from the Jiangxi Soviet Republic of 1931, the CPC has now over 90 years of experience of governance, involving many hundreds of millions of people. And this is what has been summed up, systematized, and developed in President Xi's concept of whole system, whole process people's democracy. This concept also draws on millennia of Chinese civilization and Chinese wisdom. For example, in stressing consensus and harmony, Confucius talked about the great harmony of all under heaven, and Chairman Mao invoked the same idea in his speech to the first meeting of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, a body I'll say a little bit about in a while, which was held almost immediately before liberation in 1949. And I believe this is what President Xi draws on, in part, when he puts forward his concept of a community of shared destiny for humanity. So Chinese culture also is one where the interests of the family, the community, the society, and the country take primacy over the atomized interests of individuals. So whole process, people's democracy, is therefore very different in its origins, its philosophical underpinnings, its content, and its practice from the type of parliamentary democracy practiced in most Western countries today. Whole process people's democracy is not adversarial in form. Rather, it strives to unite the greatest number of people, not to divide them into hostile camps. The establishment of socialism and the elimination of exploitation and oppression as the defining features of society serves to create the material basis for this inclusive, non-adversarial democracy. In Western capitalist societies, being a politician is a profession. It has become, above all, a vehicle for personal advancement. We've seen how, for example, President Clinton or Prime Minister Blair used their period in public office as a springboard to become multimillionaires later. And we can see it ever more clearly today when we look at the shallow personalities who have been elevated to the leadership of both major political parties in the United Kingdom. In the United States, the situation is, if anything, even more grotesque. Here, politics has become degraded to a game for the very rich. To hold any kind of serious elected office in the United States, you have to be not simply a millionaire, but a multimillionaire. In his famous 1863 Gettysburg Address, President Abraham Lincoln advocated government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But in 2011, the distinguished economist Joseph Stiglitz described US democracy as being of 1%, by 1%, for 1%. In China, the situation is quite different. For the overwhelming majority of the delegates to its main legislative body, the National People's Congress, and its equivalent bodies down to the very local levels, being a politician is not their full-time occupation. They are to be found working in their local communities, among the people they represent, and who have selected them to speak for their interests. They are drawn from every profession, including ordinary workers and farmers. Only in a country like China or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea or Cuba can someone be both a sanitation worker and a parliamentarian. And very importantly, all of China's 55 nationalities are guaranteed representation in the parliament. There is a world of difference between this form of ongoing accountability and the system here in the United Kingdom, which is increasingly and aptly being described as an elective dictatorship, one where people are allowed once every 5 years or so to place an X against the name selected by one or other of the major parties, after which, for the period of their office, their accountability to their constituents is precisely zero. Possibilities to elect a genuine independent or a candidate from a minor party in our largely first past the post system are few and far between. As a result, not only is there a complete lack of accountability, whole sections of the population are effectively denied any kind of representation whatsoever. President Xi Jinping described this system very well when he said, if the people are awakened only at voting time and dormant afterward, if the people are favored during canvassing but are left out after elections, this is not true democracy. In China's system, the representation and harmonization of the interests of all sections of society is further guaranteed by the system of people's congresses being complemented at all levels by that of the People's Political Consultative Conferences, as I just mentioned about the first one before liberation. As an advisory body, this brings together party and non-party people, members of the various democratic parties in China that represent different sectors of society, experts from numerous professions, religious figures, entrepreneurs, overseas Chinese, and many others to supervise the work of government and lend their expertise and experience in an advisory capacity. Of course, whole part process, people's democracy, is not a complete or perfect system. It is a developing concept. It is a work in progress. It is qualified by the material realities that despite its stupendous progress, China still remains a developing country and moreover faces an increasingly complex external environment characterized by a new Cold War. Nevertheless, through this system, through the development of this system, Chinese people are increasingly gaining genuine and vital experience in running their country and their own affairs. At the 19th Congress of the Communist Party of China, held in 2017, President Xi Jinping said that socialism with Chinese characteristics offers the people of developing countries in particular a new option for those wishing to rapidly develop their economies while maintaining their independence. Likewise, I believe whole process people's democracy also offers a valuable point of reference for those seeking to dynamically and creatively involve the mass of the people in the running and building of a new society. I think it is this, above all, that makes your event today so timely and significant. I'd just like to end on a personal note. I visited Pakistan in 2017 to study CPEC, together with a good friend in London, Mushtaq Lashari. This was, I really want to say this, truly one of the great experiences of my life. I send my warmest greetings to the China Institute and all the people of Pakistan. I wish you every success and thank you again for today's invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett. Thank you for your insights. And I think your points that you made, 2 points are very relevant, that what is happening in China today after liberation under the Communist Party, they drew on the millennia of Chinese wisdom, of harmony, of coexistence, and of relating to the people through people-centered development. And secondly, I think your point is well taken, that China doesn't have full-time politicians. It's the only country where a sanitation worker can also be a parliamentarian, as you said rightly, because this is how functions take place. So thank you for your insights and thank you for the good work that you're doing as part of the Friends of Socialist China, and we look forward to cordially welcoming you back to Pakistan. Your last visit was 5 years ago. A lot has changed, and some for the better, regarding the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and which is, as you know, the centerpiece of the Belt and Road Initiative. Thank you so much, Mr. Bennett, and stay safe. God bless. Thank you. Now, I would like to request Mr. Hali, Sultan Hali Sahib, the author, the writer, the former Air Force officer, who's an old friend of China and who has sharp instincts and who is putting pen to paper, his writings. So we learn always from his speeches as well as his literary contributions. Thank you. Over to you, Hali Sahib.
Thank you so much, Senator Mushahid Hussain. And it is indeed a pleasure to address such an august gathering where I've already listened to two, or rather I should say three, including you, Mushahid, the luminaries. I feel I am at an advantage to be able to comment on this specific topic because for the first time I visited China in 1974 as a young pilot officer of the Pakistan Air Force as an air crew. And since then, I've been visiting many times. I have been a virtual, I would say, eyewitness to the development of China, and especially the wonders that the Communist Party of China has installed and brought about results which have really shaken the world. Now, but we are not going to talk about the development. Of course, the development is the offshoot of good governance, but we are talking about the democratic process. And what is another reason for my interest, and which resulted in my latest book, which was 100 Years of the Communist Party of China, was that I was invited, the only Pakistani journalist to have been invited to represent Pakistan, and on the occasion of the 18th National Congress, when President Xi Jinping became the president and the paramount leader. And that really whetted my appetite to study the system, especially the Communist Party of China, and what are the reasons of its success, and why does the West fail to understand it. I came across an old Chinese folk story about this person who had lost his axe. And he suspected that his neighbor was the culprit. And each time he used to look at the neighbor, he would find, reasons to cement his suspicions that the neighbor was the thief. But after a few weeks, he managed to find the axe, which was lying in a secluded corner of his own house. And now whenever he used to look at his neighbor, he used to find reasons of his not being guilty. The point I'm trying to make, or which is the crux of this particular folk story, is that you have to be open-minded. If you perceive people with a closed mind, with the splintered vision of ethnocentrism, you're bound to miss the point. And that is what's happening when the West perceives China and its system of democracy. It tries to compare it with the Westminster system or their own systems. And since they do not conform to those ideas, they believe that China is undemocratic. The fact is, and I am willing to bet my life on it because I have spent a lifetime, more than 48 years studying China, that the system they have evolved suits them. And it is a dynamic system. It is a system in which the Communist Party of China is willing to look inwards, admit that it has made mistakes, but apply course correction. So much so that President Xi Jinping, when he came into power, one of the most important steps he took was to ensure that the corruption is weeded out. And he made also certain that commissions were set up, and in his own words, tigers as well as flies were sorted. That means that the people at the highest position or even at the lowest, if they had indulged in corruption, they would be taken to task. And this has brought about an amazing change in the society. And Senator Mushahid Hussain named two very important studies, especially the research which have been carried out, which give credence to the fact that the ordinary Chinese is satisfied with the system of governance. And these are words coming from two independent American or US, states, institutions like the Harvard, the Ash Center, and what Senator Mushahed Hussain probably politely did not mention, that the same studies have pointed out that in the United States, the level of satisfaction is as low as 38 or 39%. So there is a sharp contrast. And these are words coming from independent American study centers. Okay. Now, you see, let me give you very briefly some of the features that make the Communist Party of China unique. First of all, is collective leadership. You see, the West thinks that the Chinese are undemocratic, but the fact is, at the grassroots level, they represent and they elect their own leaders, who in turn elects the ones in the next year, and so on, till you reach the highest tiers, which are the National Conference. Now, the second aspect of the Communist Party of China is democratic centralism. The third is shuangui, which is a Chinese word, which is actually an internal disciplinary process conducted by the Central Commission for Discipline, Inspection of the Communist Party of China, and its lower level affiliates on members of the party who are suspected of violations of discipline, a charge which usually refers to corruption, but can occasionally carry other connotations as well. Now, this is an extremely important aspect. Then, of course, there's the multi-party cooperation system, central organization, a very important aspect, and I think Ambassador Masood hinted on it, the Communist Party of China recruitment procedure. Now, this is something, akin to what we have in Pakistan, the system for becoming a bureaucrat, for joining the civil service. It is a very elaborate system. You have to appear in various examinations. You have to prepare. I mean, a person like Xi Jinping, for example, he failed in his attempt 7 times before he finally became a member of the Communist Party of China. And the beauty is, I'll commit the crime of repeating, but that even if you are a fisherman or a janitor, you still have the chance of becoming a member of the Communist Party of China. Now, you see, why the party is so popular? Why do the average Chinese find the Communist Party of China something in which they can take pride? Because you see, there are litmus tests. One of the litmus tests of a ruling party is that it should be able to handle a crisis. And the biggest crisis of this century, at least, was the COVID-19, although it may have sprouted in Wuhan. But the important thing is how the Chinese handled it. President Xi Jinping handled it on the front foot. Within weeks, hospitals were created. The average Chinese was not only provided relief. My son and daughter-in-law, they were doing their PhD in the city of Wuhan. And they tell me that they were quarantined and the state took the responsibility of providing them food, milk for the children, and even vaccinations, and when it became available, and all this was on state expense. So why wouldn't the average Chinese feel proud of the Communist Party of China, which stood by it when the moment of crisis was there? The second thing is a miracle of this century, which was achieved as the first centennial goal by President Xi Jinping, eradicating poverty. Now, again, it is not a mean achievement. You see, there are Western observers who were apprehensive, and they were saying that this is probably not true. It's not. Again, from Abraham Lincoln, although he's been quoted earlier, he said that you can fool some people for some time, some people for all the time, all people for some time, but never all the people for all the time. And this is true about the state of the eradication of poverty, that this is something which has been achieved, it is going to stay, and steps have been taken where the average Chinese can say goodbye to poverty for the rest of his life. Now, since we were asked to limit ourselves to 8 minutes, so I will conclude my speech by saying that one of the best things, of course, Keith Bennett talked about harmony and other things, but the most important thing Xi Jinping did, and he started it off when Obama was the president, he extended an arm of friendship, and he said that let's get together and eradicate poverty from the world. He did the same with Donald Trump. He did the same with Joe Biden. Unfortunately, these fell on deaf ears. Xi Jinping has proved that he can achieve it in his own country, but he's willing to share China's largesse and China's experience to ensure that poverty is eradicated from the world. And this makes him a statesman, a leader, a paramount leader who is to be respected, and the Chinese Communist Party to be admired. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your insights. And I think you gave a very broad canvas. And I think what you said, that this system suits China and it's been successful. And if there are failings, if there are problems, if there are mistakes, then the ability to do a course correction. I think that is also extremely important, and the issue of accountability. And you mentioned President Xi Jinping. I remember my first meeting with President Xi Jinping. He was vice president then. It was 2010. And people knew that in the next setup, which is coming in the next party Congress, he would be the next leader after Hu Jintao. So I met him for 1 hour in the Great Hall of the People. And I was very impressed. That is the first of 5 or 6 meetings since then. And I told my friends that here's a leader with a difference. He was very confident, very decisive. He didn't speak from notes. And he had aides sitting there, but they would not whisper anything or tell him what to do. And we had a long conversation. And I remember at that time, I asked him about the vision for China. And, you know, he started from 2010 to 2049, 2050. And that time he told me that our goal is to eliminate absolute poverty from China in 2021. And I said, why 2021? He said, because that's the 100 years of the establishment of the Communist Party of China. So you see, Chinese have a very strategic long view. They are very patient people because it reflects their civilization, which is the only continuous civilization for the last 5,000 years. So I think, and they've proven that, and as they did on the COVID also, and climate change also. So I think it's important that we get the facts right. And that's why you also quoted from the study, which is done by the Americans, which you don't find in the American media, by the way, because it's positive about China, that the level of popular support and satisfaction with the government in China is so high among the people, unlike other countries. Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Mr. Raza Naeem. Mr. Raza Naeem is a very big activist, he's a writer, he's a scholar, he's a translator, and he's also, more importantly right now, the president of the Progressive Writers Association, which is one of the oldest organizations of progressive writers in the South Asian subcontinent. So I would like to request Mr. Raza Naeem to take the floor now.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. First of all, I would really like to thank Shahid Hussain Sayyid Sahab for extending invitation to me. I'm a very humble scribe and observer of China. I'm not an expert by any means, because, you know, China is a huge country and it's a huge subject, you know, and whatever I say here will of necessity be a very preliminary, you know, and so-called experts have learned to eat their hats in the last 20 years about whatever they have predicted about China or United States or the world financial crisis, Corona, what have you. So yeah, I'm going to be adopting the same approach. Just some big initial remarks that if we believe that the 20th century was shaped by the rise of the Soviet Union and its clash with the United States, sometime hot, sometime cold, then the 21st century will undoubtedly, we can say it beyond any reason or doubt, will be shaped by the rise of China. And it's economically, politically, and increasingly its foreign policy. And Chinese foreign policy is a very underexplored subject, not only in Pakistan, but around the world. So maybe Senator Mushahid Hussain Saab, in the next seminars can pay attention to this very murky aspect of the new China. How did it come about that if the West was the workshop of the world in the last century, production-wise, commodity-wise, how did it happen that the center of the world decisively shifted from the West in the last century to the East in the 21st century? And by the East, I mean broadly East Asia, Taiwan, South Korea, and China being at the center of this, the workshop of the world as it is now called. How did it happen? It's a very inspirational story, and it happened partly by design and partly by accident, because who would have thought, we have already referred to the unification of China, which I believe is one of the great underappreciated political events of the 20th century. Who would have thought, this country which was fragmented, one part occupied by one power, one part occupied by another power, literally country going to the dogs. Who would have thought that this country is going to unify in such a way and, really, not only lift the maximum number of people out of poverty in the 20th century, but actually lead the way forward in the 21st century. If someone had even raised this notion 40 years ago, he would have been laughed out of court. This fact that, we have this so the Chinese story, whether you are talking about the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, or you're talking about, what happened after, China became one country under Chairman Mao Zedong in 1949, and what happened subsequently is a hugely inspirational tale, and in a variety of aspects. And also, I also have my eye on what happened in the Soviet Union in the 1990s. And, it's a very interesting comparison, the the CPSU, as you call it, in the 1990s, and what happened in the CCP. There are very interesting differences, which may also help us to understand why Soviet Union disintegrated to the great happiness of the West, and why China is still standing, and we are celebrating the 100th, the centenary of the birth of the Chinese Communist Party. I believe we will also be very soon celebrating the centenary of the Chinese Revolution, in 20 odd years' time. So, China is actually here to stay. It's not going away anywhere. What happened in the CPSU was that in the 1990s, it was a gerontocracy. The average age of the Politburo was 80. And just to tell you, Gorbachev was the youngest member of the Politburo, good old Gorbachev. And on the other hand, the CCP, consistently brought in younger layers of people from the population. And this process was not a new development. This had been going on even before the great experience of the Long March. So this was one difference, and we tend to underappreciate that when we talk about, because of course we believe that the Soviet Union is done and dusted, and we have relegated communism to the dustbin of history. So, and history, of course, is not really taken very seriously around the world as a subject anymore, whether in the West or sadly speaking, in Pakistan. Secondly, the relation of the Chinese Communist Party with the people. I mean, this relationship was non-existent in the Soviet Union. Remember that when Lenin came to the head of the Bolshevik party, it was a very rapid revolution. They were not even prepared to take power in 1917. So policy in the Soviet Union was consistently made on the hoof, and the Bolshevik party mainly operated in the cities. Their link with the peasantry was, was minimal. On the other hand, in China, this link with the peasantry was forged in those 20 years when the Communist Party of China was on the retreat. This link between the Chinese peasantry and, the people and the Communist Party was forged, and it led to the popularity of the Chinese Communist Party among some amazing layers. I mean, for example, middle class intellectuals were drawn to the Communist Party of China. So this is the reason, this organic link which was forged between the Chinese peasantry and the Chinese Communist Party is the reason why the peasantry has supported the Chinese Communist Party through thick and thin. After 1949, I mean, they have forgiven the party for even the disasters, for example, the great disasters of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, which I believe was a crazy attempt to overtake the West. And especially now, it's easier to make sense of now when the United States has identified China as rival number one in its economic policy. So and of course, then you come to the four modernizations. I don't think they have been referred to so far. This was, what we now take for granted, these amazing growth rates, for example. I think it was the second wave of modernization in 1985 to 86, So what did they do, after Mao passed away, Deng Xiaoping, who was, by the way, a veteran of the Long March, he called together, the Chinese Communist Party, and they actually had a debate, and this is what the West refuses to understand. The Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people, they have a relationship of debate. Constant debate about wherever direction they are going. And of course, the West cannot understand this. So in the 1980s, they looked at their neighborhood, what had happened in South Korea, where economically great changes had taken place, under a dictatorship. I mean, they looked at, Japan, admittedly, they had received aid from the United States, and still the LDP there is very much dependent on that. And they looked at Taiwan, and they said, if they can do it, why can't Chinese people do it? So they had a look at their neighborhood, and they were under no confusion, about anything. So they learned from the experiences of their counterparts, although those experiences obviously were capitalist oriented. But they learned from the experiences of their of their neighborhood, and essentially, they turned everything around. And that obviously did not mean that they totally dismissed what Mao had done. I believe that if the Communist Party, if the Chinese Revolution had not laid the social base
We can't hear you now.
He's back. Raza Naeem is back.
You can't hear him? Mr. Raza Naeem, I think
He's muted. He is muted, right?
Okay.
Hello. Sorry, I think the connection was a bit unstable over there.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I believe that the Chinese Revolution of 1949 laid the social and material basis for all these reforms which took place after the 1980s, and that was a time of great debate as well. And the Chinese Communist Party opened it up to the students. Periodicals were being written, the students were debating the direction where China was going to go. So that is also the achievement of the Chinese Communist Party. And we, the people in the West, don't understand this culture, which is an ancient culture. It is not a new culture. They don't understand that this culture has not been there. It's not a very recent development, and I think if and whatever China has achieved under the Communist Party or since 1949 is a great blow to this behemoth, this bogeyman, which the Western economists, policymakers, diplomats, and statesmen have set up, that you can't progress economically under a one-party state. I mean, the Chinese have really smashed this notion that you need a Western-style democracy to progress economically. Nonsense, they say. You don't need. You can still progress. You can still progress economically having a one-party state in power. So I mean, I was reading all these editorials which people like Shadi Hamid and Thomas Friedman were writing when this coronavirus struck. And they just couldn't get over the fact that China had managed to raise a state-of-the-art hospital in just 2 weeks. I mean, and they couldn't do it. I mean, Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, I mean, he himself was affected with coronavirus, it was, and in New York, my friends were telling me it's a death trap out there. This is right at the time when coronavirus struck. So all these countries were struggling to make do, I mean, with coronavirus. They were not even prepared with all their resources and, all their military spending. But here was a country supposedly ruled by a one-party state, supposedly a communist country, an authoritarian country which violates human rights left, right, and center. How did it manage to raise a state-of-the-art hospital in just 2 weeks? I mean, these commentators couldn't get over it, and they had to eat their words when even the United Kingdom had to import its PPEs from China because, I mean, their hospitals couldn't produce it in time, So what was that all about, So you can't have your cake and eat it too, I'm sorry, So, so one of the big successes of the Chinese model and the Chinese Communist Party is how they managed to deal with the coronavirus, I mean, it's Western observers who have been, waxing lyrical about it. I mean, they're not communists by any stretch of the imagination. They're not like Edgar Snow and Egan Smedley, whom Shahid Saab might remember from his early days, of youth. I mean, they are very much infected by the propaganda, which goes by for objective analysis about China these days, So what China did, it is, it beggars belief that they set a record for pandemic management. In almost 2 months, they had literally, managed to wipe out coronavirus from the map. I mean, there has been no example of this human pandemic management in world history, I mean, and how did they do it? I mean, I'm sorry to say, but Asian values I'm not convinced that it was Asian values which did that. I mean, this has been going on since the days of Herman Khan, Shahid Saab in the 1970s, the Confucian ethic. I'm sorry, I am not really convinced. It was socialist values. It was socialist values. It was the Communist Party of China and their tradition. Remember, tens of thousands of people died while sacrificed their lives in the revolution in 1949. So this actually happened again during the time of coronavirus. If there is one thing which we need to understand about the Chinese Communist Party, 2 things. Number one, their astonishing determination, which they have consistently, and not just in coronavirus, since the last 100 years. And secondly, their astonishing recovery from every crisis which they have managed to conduct. I mean, these 2 things unfortunately cannot be understood by that whole Western tradition, where there is no such tradition of. So the Chinese people actually saw frontline workers in the Chinese Communist Party being, they died while fighting for the coronavirus, So this model of putting people first, not economic modernization, but putting people first, not authoritarian, totalitarian management as the Western people would advise you. Here is something which I would like to quote from a Western journalist, Mr. Ian Johnson, who was actually expelled from China. This is what he's saying about coronavirus and this is in Wuhan, which had just gone into lockdown from 23rd January to 8 April 2020. This is what he saw in Wuhan. I'm quoting him now in the New York Times. Compliance in China was overwhelmingly voluntary, I quote. Beijing streets were empty not because people were forced to stay at home, as was the case in Italy and Spain, but because they mostly accepted the leadership's message. Contrast it what is happening in Pakistan, The result is that China, the pandemic's epicenter, a country of 1.4 billion people, has had 4,634 deaths, a seventh of Spain's, an eighth of Italy's, a ninth of Britain's, and less than a 40th of the United States. End quote. And Ian Johnson, a veteran correspondent of the New York Times, earned his spurs by being expelled from the People's Republic of China, is not a communist by any stretch of the imagination. Similarly, Martin Wolf, who is a very well-known commentator for the Financial Times, he stressed, and I quote, that China was, just as China was successful in quote, bringing the disease under control in Hubei, so it helped to halt the spread across the country. This is Martin Wolf writing for the Financial Times, and the Financial Times, is an organ which is a mouthpiece for the capitalist establishment in the United Kingdom. So this is the NYT and Financial Times across the Atlantic, two publications of record, as they like to claim, accepting that what the West could not do, was done by the Chinese Communist Party. My friend Keith Bennett referred to the mass line. The mass line was again evident when China battled the coronavirus. There were foot soldiers, managers who they sent, across the villages on vaccination campaigns, through messaging, through quarantining, through spreading the word, as so to speak. So this mass line, and normally we see that if when you are giving precedence to one emergency, it usually you have to draw away manpower from other health emergencies, but this was not the case in the case of China. The hospitals kept functioning, everyone was quarantined, and all resources being directed to the coronavirus did not in any way affect what China was doing with other health emergencies. Thirdly, we haven't talked about that, how the countryside acted as a shock absorber for the people who were made redundant in the cities. The Chinese countryside welcomed them with open arms, and it was the Chinese countryside which did not have a famine. I'm quoting here, the 2020 harvest was not affected by any disaster. So they kept grain supplies, vegetable supplies while the coronavirus was going on in the cities. And they absorbed this unemployment, when people were made unemployed and redundant in the Chinese cities, and they had to come back to the countryside. The Chinese countryside kept supplying, kept up with their supplies of grain and vegetables, So this is an underappreciated and under-commented, achievement which the Chinese countryside came up with during the coronavirus. So I have also said in other occasions that Wuhan is like an arc of the future, because allegedly the coronavirus began in Wuhan and it has come full circle now. It actually ended in Wuhan as well. So if you will, I'm not too fond of gazing in crystal balls, Mushahid Saab, but I believe that, Wuhan basically defines pre-COVID, COVID, and post-COVID. It's like an arc, So it has come full circle in Wuhan, So what I'm trying to say is, basically, I'm just going to conclude now that, it's not that debate doesn't take place in China. The debate takes place, but, the Chinese don't need lessons from anybody, They're very good at internalizing these lessons themselves, they tried to teach China a lesson 10 years ago when they gave this Nobel Peace Award to this horrible person called Lao Xiaobo, and they imprisoned him. I mean, I'm not a fan of imprisoning anybody, but to give this clown a Nobel Peace Prize, you know, he is a person, Liu Xiaobo, who said that China is an uncivilized country which needs 100 years of colonization by either Japan or the United States to make it into a developed country. This is one of the things he put on paper. Secondly, he said that the Iraq war, which the United States and the West, you know, they devastated that country, was perfectly justified. I mean, perfectly. So this clown, I mean, this he's given, and the Norwegian Prime Minister publicly admitted that we did this to teach China a lesson. Excuse me, the Chinese don't need lessons from you. This is a very bad and counterproductive way to teach lessons to the Chinese.
Absolutely correct.
You know, so do it like they did in the case of coronavirus. If you want to, if China wants to teach, China actually has a lot to teach the world. So if you want to teach China a lesson, then learn from how the Chinese are teaching you. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that vaccine diplomacy, the Chinese Communist Party said that we are going to make Chinese vaccines a global public good. And they've delivered on that. You know, we are sitting in Pakistan. We are beneficiaries of this vaccine diplomacy. And this is exactly how their comrades in Cuba were doing, you know. So just to conclude, China is rising. It has risen. This is a fact of the world. You know, whether the United States and the West likes it or not, it is a world power. They will do it in their own way, you know, when the time comes. And I have considered myself a friend of China, you know. Yes, by all means, talk about democracy, talk about human rights, but talk it in a language of mutual respect, you know, of treating them as equals, you know, not where you are hectoring them from the pulpit. You know, the West is no, I mean, look, if they look at their own track record, they are nobody to tell someone else, and especially China, about the value of human rights. So, you know, and China, of course, you know, we also know, you know, will they react if their national interests are threatened? Of course they will. If they're militarily attacked, of course they will. Just like any other country in the world would respond. You know, so on that note, I would like to thank you once again, Mushahid Saab, for having me. And you know, I'm sorry if any of my observations have rubbed somebody the wrong way. But
no, not at all. Thank you so much for a very animated presentation, and you covered a lot of broad canvas. And about teaching a lesson, Chairman Mao used to say that so-and-so is a teacher by negative example. How not to do things. There's also a teacher. You learn from the positive how not to do things. And this is what they try to teach them. You just gave two examples. I just want to briefly mention them before we go to the, normally it's ladies first, but this time it's ladies last, because we have the last word is going to come from Beijing, from the Zoom, Saiba. You mentioned the Cultural Revolution. See, the Cultural Revolution was, and I think I'm one of the few living persons who, when I first went to China, I was 16 years old in 1970. I met even the Gang of Four: Chiang Ching, Chang Chung Chiao, Wang Hong Wen, Yao Wen Yuan, and Chen Boda was our host, and the revolutionary ballets. So it was a very exciting period, and actually it was directed against the Soviet-style bureaucracy which Chairman Mao felt was developing in the Communist Party of China. And he issued the first big character poster, which said, "Bombard the headquarters," which was the headquarters of the Communist Party. So, you know, he had this view that we are becoming slow and sluggish and bureaucratic. Secondly, you mentioned the New York Times. It's very interesting. I was reading the New York Times on the 40th anniversary of the reform and opening up. You know, and this plenum which took place, the third plenum of the 11th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China on 18th December 1978, adopted it after 3 months of discussion. 3 months, working conference, special groups, debate, pro and con, and then it was a very democratic debate. The New York Times said that, and this they are writing in on the 40th anniversary, that most of the experts in America thought that Deng Xiaoping's experiment this socialism with Chinese characteristics is bound to fail. And because he's opening up the Chinese economy. And they said that most Western experts thought we just had to wait. And he said, 40 years later, we are still waiting. So they admitted that. So thank you. So on that note, and by the way, on Deng Xiaoping, one of the best books which I've read is, and it's a very moving book, is written by his daughter, My Father Deng Xiaoping. It's written by his daughter, Deng Rong. It's an amazing book. When I read the book, I had tears in my eyes. How that man struggled, his commitment, his passion. 3 times he was removed. And I remember when I went to China, there was this little joke also before they said there were 3 political prisoners in a Beijing jail. They are discussing, the old man, why are you in jail? He said, I am for Deng Xiaoping. They asked the second man, why are you in jail? I am against Deng Xiaoping. They asked the third man, why are you in jail? He said, I am Deng Xiaoping. So this is how. Okay, over to you, Zoon Ahmed Khan Sahaba, Pakistan's presence there. And she worked very closely with me in the documentary, which was made by the CCTV a few years ago. And she's a very efficient facilitator and a person who is a doer and gets things done. And who has shown a commitment to China. She told me, she was studying, she said, I want to be a China expert. I will stay in China. I will live in China. And Zoon, you have kept your word. And well done.
I have.
And more power to your pen. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Moshahid. And of course, I'd like to thank DCI and the Friends of Silk Road initiative. I think with so many real experts, I'm really in the process of learning. I've been living in China for 6.5 years. And in 2015, when I moved here, like Mr. Raza just mentioned, how Chinese foreign policy is something that we know quite little about. That was my reason to move to China in 2015. And I was very lucky, actually, to meet Senator Moshahid and Ambassador Masood Khalid. You have been such extraordinary mentors. It's not even an exaggeration that I think because of people like you around me, I've been able to, 6.5 years on, I'm still here, I'm still learning. And I think in the first 2 years, I thought I had absorbed a lot. I really understood. The Belt and Road was really in the initial phases. We saw how CPEC was evolving, very fast progress. And it was really on the global level that China's enhanced commitment towards especially the South-South cooperation and development, addressing the gap between what the needs of the developing countries were, how best China could facilitate that process was really kicking off. But now, 6.5 years on, I feel like I hadn't even hit the tip of the iceberg. And I think first, I would like to start with, it should come as no surprise that after our expert speakers, the little notes that I made have been, are a bit redundant, but I'll try and make references based on my notes and some personal experiences and really try and help our audience today understand what this whole process, people's democracy, really looks and feels like from obviously my humble perspective, and how is it that ordinary people are being engaged. So one thing that came up just in the last speaker, Mr. Raza's comments, was how during COVID-19, China's extraordinary way to deal with COVID-19. And I think in the beginning, when there was a lot of misinformation, there was this idea that even that the masks were, people were being asked to wear masks. There was a lockdown in Wuhan. It was all being interpreted as if this is being forced on the people. But what I experienced, and it was also luck that I was in Beijing. My flight was the first one on 3rd February that got rescheduled. I was on my way back to Pakistan. And I couldn't be more grateful for these 2+ years now. Because for the first 2 months that I was alone in my apartment in a self-imposed lockdown, people around me, we were in touch and nobody forced us to stay indoors. We were in Beijing. We were asked to be cautious, but we were really told what the potential risks are. And the risk was not to me or individuals, us. It was about us being a risk to the people around us. Possibly, we could have had COVID-19. And if I go outside, I will be putting other people at risk. So that idea of people really meeting those policies halfway and making an extraordinary response possible is something that Mr. Ambassador Masood Khalid also mentioned, that China's success is about the people as well. And of course, with COVID-19, how the whole country responded, how the government was very efficient with understanding. Of course, there was the SARS experience previously, so they had a countrywide mechanism, but the swift response of the party, of frontline workers, and of ordinary people in volunteering and voluntarily taking those precautions as well made all the difference. Then I think one thing that China gets absolutely right, and that inspires ordinary people to try their best to play that role, whether we talk about poverty alleviation. So a lot of people would interpret China's poverty alleviation as these policies that are magically alleviating poverty. Of course, there are policies, there's consistency, there is constant reflection and constant improvement. The whole process, People's Democracy, in my view, is really about constantly gauging what are the evolving needs of society and how can we meet them. And this is going to be a process. How in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, the idea is that there is no perfect system that can transcend time completely, which is what millennia of history teach the Chinese people from those who I've talked to, and also the Chinese government. The idea is that we have to deliver. So the system's purpose is to deliver. What is it supposed to deliver? Improvement in quality of lives of ordinary people. And that is made possible on the localized level by giving people better incentives. So many of last year was the centenary of the CPC, and our think tank CCG organized a Global Young Leaders Dialogue. We traveled to many provinces. I was also able to travel with CGTN, with other media, the media that was profiling Senator Mujahid as well. And I was able to travel to some of these areas that had just come out of poverty. What happened was that the local party representatives and the farmers, the villagers, whoever, they came up with innovative ways to make the most of these situations they found themselves in. It's not one formula all over the country. It's a basic, their deliverables, their KPIs, and how can each county, each village, each city, each province on its own level achieve that in the best way possible. So it's very innovative solutions that ordinary people are enabling. And that's the kind of energy, vigor, and hard work, which was mentioned by some of the speakers. And I think that's very important if we as developing countries, we talk about how we want to learn from China's poverty alleviation experience. It's really a combination of enabling ordinary people to work hard and to bring the best circumstances possible to them. It's not just possible with policies, it has to take the energy and active participation of people. And my insight on this is that really the Communist Party of China makes ordinary people the heroes. And the first time I noticed it, I'm still new here. I think 6.5 years. I've met people who've lived here for so long, and when we look at Senator Mujahid, Ambassador Masood Khalid, so many others, you have a long-term perspective. But for me, the first time I noticed it was when the frontline workers during COVID-19 were the purpose for people to stay at home. They were the heroes. They were the ones being profiled. They were the face of what the nation needs to live up to. And if I thought about the relative inconvenience for me to have to wear a mask, to maybe stay alone indoors, that was very selfish, because those are the people really sacrificing their lives. And they were made the models for society. They were that status given to them. It's something that I started noticing in every aspect. So on the 100th anniversary of the CPC, the July 1st medals, they were given to 29 frontliners of the Communist Party of China. And by frontliners, like Mr. Keith Bennett mentioned, these are very ordinary people that represent the government. So I had the opportunity to interview Chang Wei-mei, who's a party member. She runs the only free of cost women's high school in a town, Huaping. And that school has been extraordinarily inspiring for people all over China. The personal hardship and the sacrifice and her dedication to improve the education of young girls in a mountainous area where some of their parents think or would have thought previously that education for girls is not important was something that moved a lot of people. She is the kind of 29 people who got the special July 1st medal on the 100th anniversary of the CPC. So this kind of recognition for people who are working on the front line, who are making a tangible difference in whatever capacity possible, makes a big difference. It's something we can learn a lot from. I also had another example where someone, and I don't remember exactly, but someone mentioned how the NPC is ordinary people. It was a surprise to me that one of my friends recently profiled an NPC member. She was a bus driver in Tianjin, and everyone knew she just drives a bus. This is her full-time job, and people come up to her, share their concerns, share what they think can be improved. And really, that's what grassroots also means. These are really ordinary people with access that have the real pulse, the real ideas, and they are very approachable. So that kind of representation is also what makes China immensely effective. I think if I do take another minute, it would be immensely unfair. But there's a lot I can talk about. I'll conclude in 1 minute. I think a lot of times what all of our speakers said today really reflects how China is, I would say, deliberately misinterpreted, because China is setting an example that one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's something, if developing countries, especially looking at China, how China made this extraordinary, the scale, speed, and scope of China's development is unprecedented. A democracy is a system that delivers. So even when the report was released, the title was "A Democracy That Delivers." This is a democracy that is consistently improving the quality of lives of people. So China is setting a precedent for countries to study themselves, think about what their people need and improve it. Think about their own circumstances instead of trying to import a system from abroad. Then it's about constant correction, constant improvement. I think that's also something we see in, for instance, the JCC on CPEC. It's about meeting every time and thinking about what is the progress. And within the Chinese government, it's about constantly thinking there's no perfect way forward. Nothing will be 100% good. You have to be subjective. Ordinary Chinese people I meet will say, oh, that was 70% good, 30% not good. 80% good, 20% not good. That subjectivity is built in Chinese people who see thousands of years of their history. I was talking to a tea maker in these mountain hills of Sichuan, and he could talk about his family's history from 2000 years. And that moment I thought to myself, you tell him this system from 150 years ago is perfect. And everything, all the history he recalls of his family, his ancestors, is inferior to a system that is not delivering and was just created recently. And that would be absolutely bizarre. So you need to see, I hope more people can have that valuable exposure of meeting ordinary Chinese people and understanding how that historic perspective builds room for creativity and the idea of constant improvement. I've never seen a Chinese person say, we want to be number one. They just want to be better than yesterday, today, and just improve. And that's it. And they see so much room for improvement. And I think that's something all countries can learn from. And I think China is not just a well-oiled machine, which is sometimes what people think, even if they admire China. It's the story of synergy between 1.4 billion people. So let's learn more. Have more people can have the opportunity to come here and understand better. And thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you, Zoom. Thank you so much. And you remind me of what Chairman Mao had said after the revolution: women hold half the sky. I think you're holding more than half the sky.
Not at all. But I have to add that really women, the way women are participating in public life in China is something I truly believe has made a great proportion of this progress possible. So China has made these kinds of achievements. And I'm glad that, you know, we are acknowledging that. And I hope more countries, even ours, can move towards that direction. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that so much was mentioned about Wuhan. I think the Wuhan lockdown is a heroic chapter in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Yeah. It really reminds us of, it's like the Battle of Stalingrad in World War II. The way it was done, and I think what Raza Saab also mentioned, you know, building 2 hospitals, one in 10 days, one in 14 days. It was amazing. And by the way, they did the same in Pakistan, Islamabad. The central hospital was built by the Chinese in 30 days, which is a record also by Pakistani standards. So I think that we have a lot to learn. And I'd also like to recommend some books which I think are very relevant. Leadership was mentioned, the quality of leadership of China. I think one of the best books which profiles the Communist Party of China's first generation leadership which led the revolution, in my view, is the book by an American Foreign Service officer. His name was John S. Service. He wrote the book Lost Chance in China. He was a representative of the US State Department to the Communist Party in the United Front against Japan in World War II. And he was based in Yan'an. He would be meeting Chairman Mao, Premier Zhou Enlai, Marshal Chu there. And it is based on his dispatches from the Yan'an Mountains with his dealings with the Communist Party of China's leadership in the late 30s and early 40s. And it's called Lost Chance in China. And later on, he was victimized because he was called a communist and the McCarthyists got him and he was sacked from the State Department. They said, you are pro-communist, you are pro-Chairman Mao. I think that was a great book. A current book which I just finished is a very good book by a very good Asian writer, a Singaporean statesman, Kishore Mahbubani's book, Has China Won? This is about the Cold War and it's written very well and I think it's a lot to see. One of the best books on the reform and opening up in the English language I read was by the former Deputy Prime Minister of China, who was very closely associated with Deng Xiaoping and the reform. His name is Li Lanqing, and it's called Breaking Through. And it's very interesting that this book talks about, Keith Bennett mentioned his visit to Pakistan in 2017. This gentleman was a technocrat, and he visited Pakistan in the 1980s. And he said, we were so Deng Xiaoping, Chinese are very humble. They say we want to learn from others. So they said, go to 3 countries in Asia, Pakistan, Philippines, and Singapore. And Deng Xiaoping himself went to Singapore because it's a Chinese majority country. How have they progressed? So they say, go to Pakistan, learn from Pakistan. And he says Pakistan was a role model according to Li Lanqing in the 80s. The bureaucracy was very good. He says we were asked to prepare a report, get some loan from the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. We did not know how to write a feasibility report. So we went to the Pakistanis and he talks of the Karachi port. So it's a very good book. And I think one article which is very important, I think, about the new Cold War, which is critical, is Fareed Zakaria in the Foreign Affairs, which was in January, February 2020. It's called The New China Scare. I'm quoting the Western sources because, they say that is propaganda. You can see that how the American military industrial complex, the American security establishment, in its search for enemies, and now how they try to demonize China, and then how they try to focus on that. So I think that a lot has been said about China. I think Pakistan also needs socialism with Pakistani characteristics to move forward. We have had enough of these experiments with the IMF 22 times. And I think we should learn from the Chinese example, how they have managed in front of our own eyes, this transformation. It's no rocket science. It's not just China, and as was mentioned, Asian tigers and so forth. So it's all doable. And it's been a very instructive learning experience for all of us. I thank you for your patience. And the purpose was to listen to each other, different perspectives, learn, and also to celebrate the fact that Pakistan-China solidarity, and especially today because Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, is here. And it's a very important, Raza Sahab, you mentioned foreign policy. Yes, there's a strategic realignment taking place in the balance of forces. And I think this is probably, as Xi Jinping said, it's a once in a century changes. We had 100 years ago, the breakup of, after World War I, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. We had, after World War II, the breakup of the British Empire. I think now we are seeing the unraveling of the American Empire, which was supposed to be 100-year American century, is I think coming to an end, and the post 9/11 era. And we are seeing Asian countries, developing countries take charge of it. So it's time that, that's why I mentioned this new realignment taking place. I call it the strategic triangle, Pakistan, China, and Saudi Arabia. It's very interesting that how the Saudis and the UAE even have refused to take calls from Biden on raising the oil prices, and they're talking of trading in RMB. So the world is being transformed, and I think the next time we'll have an in-depth discussion on this thing. I thank all of you, especially Keith Bennett from the UK, Zoon and Khan from Beijing, Raza Naim Saab from Lahore, and of course Hali Saab and Ambassador Masood Khalid Saab, our friends. They are all neighbors here. And it was a pleasure and delight. And thanks to all of you who were listening in and viewing this discussion. Thank you so much. And we look forward to further discussions on this. All the best and good day to all of you. Thank you for the harvest.